Hello and welcome to Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. I'm Becky Parker-Geist and I'm your host. Audiobook Connection is your place to learn about the audiobook creative process in discussions between the authors, narrators, producers, and post-production teams that bring them all together, as well as guests who have listened to the audiobooks and have questions for the creative teams. This podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to be with you today. Today I have with me Ron Turker, author of The Wandering Jew of St. Salacious. Ron started his career in med school and stand-up comedy around the same time. 4 years later, as graduation loomed, and after a come-to-Jesus talk with his advisor, he chose the path of surgery. 30 years later, he's returned to his comic roots to pen his thoughts and hopes for his beloved but broken healthcare system. A year ago, Ron launched his debut novel, The Wandering Jew of St. Salacious, as a love letter to medicine, but written with a very sharp pen. Ron, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me, Becky.
Oh, it's a delight. So tell us, why this book?
So this book was a few years in the making. It was as I was getting toward the end of my career, I had written a number of essays, op-eds, things that have been published in various places about medicine and how, it was becoming just progressively more and more unattainable by more people. And I wanted to bring that message around in a different way, hoping that if I put it together as fiction and in a novel form and insert or wrap it in humor, that maybe the message would have legs and keep going. And maybe, with luck, spread a bit farther than these various essays and things that I had written, which were more like little sparklers that would kind of, they'd burn bright for a little bit and then they'd burn out, and then that was the last you heard of them.
Yeah. I think the idea of bringing humor to a message is always helpful in that I think laughter opens us up, lets us hear things that we might not otherwise be able to hear. So as we go, I'd love to hear also more about how you see or experience your comedy life, if you will, or how that really plays into and has played into the writing and the recording of your audiobook.
So the roots of, at the very beginning, I started out in medical school and very quickly ended up kind of accidentally or kind of drawn into this comedy scene where I had always felt that I was a funny guy, but I didn't think of kind of ever standing up on stage with a microphone. Not that I didn't secretly yearn for that. I kind of did. I was, very jealous of people who could. But a friend of mine, one of my classmates who was a very talented singer-songwriter, decided without telling me to sign me up for an open mic. And then gave me a week's notice and said, I signed you up. You're going to do this. And, at first I was like, you're out of your mind. And my second reaction was to sit down with a legal pad and just start writing. And because of all this humor and jokes had kind of pent itself up over years, that became a very kind of fruitful session of day after day of writing. And when I got on stage, I had the unfortunate pleasure of really killing on the first time I ever got up. I mean, I had a 10-minute slot and I killed. And that made me kind of believe a couple of things that were false. Number one was comedy was easy. And number two is that I was really good at this. And that was a high like I hadn't experienced. However, I spent the next few years kind of chasing it and looking for it in different places and working in clubs and bars, et cetera, et cetera. Then I got picked up by a manager who owned a club, and then I got sent out on the road, et cetera, et cetera. But it was all about the writing and refining and refining and refining. And that's where my writing really started to get sharpened and honed. And eventually, as you mentioned, I took the path of going into medicine, becoming an academic surgeon, and spent most of my time writing academic articles for the first half of my career. And that was at first satisfying, but there was always something missing. So the latter half of my career, I started turning toward, personal essays and op-eds and things that I could, send a message and say, we're heading the wrong direction. We're heading the wrong direction. And join a chorus of voices who were doing the same. In this case, the comedy for me was my root and my base. And I felt that if I could write this book in a way that was entertaining, then I could, really get the message across more clearly. And so the comedic roots have always been there, and they've always kind of, even my day-to-day activities at work, when I go to work each day, if I'm in the clinic, if I'm in the operating room, especially in the clinic, I could have 20, 30 families in front of me during the day, and each one of them needs something different. And what I learned was that when you go in that tiny little exam room, just like on stage, you got to read the room and you got to figure out what they need. And so my routine day, my routine kind of things might be their worst nightmare, or what they perceive to be their worst nightmare. And so the comedic side of things allowed me to read them, figure out what they needed, and then take the temperature down a little bit. And that's been something that has been helpful throughout my career.
Do you find that, do you bring humor into that small room when you're with patients? Do you find that is helpful?
It's very helpful. You have to be careful with it because, you have to basically set the stage. You don't know kind of how they feel, and you have to kind of ease into it a bit. But once you're able to find their soft spot and appeal to it and get them to smile or, maybe laugh a little bit, it allows the next steps to flow more easily and freely. And it's a way of, if you're not flippant about it, it's a way of gaining trust. Like you said at the beginning, it's a way of opening people up so that the next few words that come out of your mouth, the harder stuff, can be received more readily.
So in terms of your book, when did you start with the writing process? At what point in your, relative to your career and what was happening with you in medicine?
So I started writing it in 2017. So about 20, 23, 24 years in. And, I figured I had about another 5-10 years in me to keep going. And I just got this overwhelming urge to send up a flare. And I didn't know how to do it. And I decided I could try to write a novel, which is a huge and kind of brash undertaking. And not having written long form before, I was pretty, unprepared for what that was. And luckily I had met this woman who was a creative writing instructor, and she lives in my neighborhood for a while. I took some classes with her years before, and then she moved on. But I tracked her down and asked her if she would be willing to edit for me. I'd pay her. And she said, no. And she basically said, here's the deal. I loved your writing when you were in my classes. I'm busy revising a novel of my own. And I'm at that point, I figured, well, she didn't have time for me. But that's not what she said. She said, I'll make you a deal. we can go chapter by chapter. Your writing can help kind of infuse a little bit of levity, a little bit of lightness in my writing, and I can help you with all the mechanics of how to write, how to edit, and so forth. And so I got the better part of the deal.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we would meet in coffee shops a week after week, a chapter at a time. She really taught me how to write.
Wow, that's great. So you said you felt this urge, this need to send up a flare. Tell us about that. What was going on?
Well, medicine in general has become, it's as if the caring part of healthcare has just been draining away at an ever more rapid pace. When I started in my, I started in New York, but when I trained in Chicago, on the south side of Chicago, and at what's called what would now be called a safety net hospital. It was it basically took care of the poor and the indigent. And it really opened my eyes to how life is different for so many people. And it didn't seem fair to me back then, 30 plus years ago. And what I saw was it got a little bit better slowly for a while. And then there was this culmination in 2008, 2010, when they finally cobbled together the Affordable Care Act. And it was an attempt, a beginning. But quickly, very quickly, I saw that the political winds were directly against any kind of advancement toward a more equitable, a more affordable, and a more universal system. And it was the poor. And then it was the poor and the lower middle class. And then it was the poor and the middle class. And now, with the ever rising deductibles, out of pockets, all sorts of exceptions, and so forth and so on, care is becoming out of reach of at least half or more of the population. Most people don't have, when you say, well, I bought this insurance, I'm a healthy person, and it has a $5,000 deductible. Well, most people don't have $5,000 sitting in the bank that if they trip over the sidewalk, that's something they just reach in and they say, oh, okay, that's this year, I can afford that. And people have higher deductibles than that. They have $7,000, $10,000, $15,000 deductible plans, which are these, catastrophic plans. But the catastrophe really happens after they get out of the hospital and they find all these bills. Perhaps there are things that are out of network that won't be covered because the doctor that they had, or the ambulance that they were picked up by, or worse, the air ambulance was not covered by their plan. So that $10,000 deductible now becomes $10,000 plus a $30,000, $40,000 flight from point A to point B. And we really have become a very broken system. We're not approachable. We've made ourselves more and more distant from our patients through incredibly frustrating phone trees and billing departments that don't return messages and so forth and so on. I mean, it's all, the impossible complexities are all pushed onto the patient rather than taken care of by those who are reaping the benefits of this. We have all of these middlemen in the middle of the middlemen there's so many layers of people who are dipping in and taking money out of the healthcare system. And in return, their job is to just make it more complicated for people, your mom, your dad, your grandma, to make contact. We're pushing our patients away from us. And that's, what I saw, just progressively getting worse. My patients were having a harder time reaching me.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think this is the main reason why doctors and nurses are leaving the profession earlier? Yes.
There's something that's referred to as cumulative moral injury. And what it is, it originally was referred to soldiers on the battlefield and carrying out orders that they didn't feel were really appropriate and doing things that they didn't feel appropriate. And eventually, it wasn't just one episode, two episodes. It's this constant daily feeling inside of you. I'm doing the wrong thing. I'm heading the wrong direction, or I'm hurting people that I'm here to help. Well, if you go into medical care, 95% of people who go into medical care at their core really want to care. They really want to help people. But if moment by moment, you're being told that's not the goal here. The goal, and it's not overt. It's kind of, just this subtle messaging of we need to move faster. We need to, give less. We need to do less. We need to see more. You don't have the time, as I said earlier, to sit and to listen to those patients and their families and find out what is it that they need. And it's hard to continue caring when you're being actively blocked from that caring. And I think a lot of people, myself included, feel like we're in a way harming patients, harming the people we're tasked to care for by not attending to their needs, or by really bankrupting them or financially stressing them on the way to caring for them.
Now, I know that you've spent part of your career working for doing care for kids. Was that rewarding?
That is the majority of my career, is caring for kids. I did a little bit of adult work when I was younger. I did a little bit, tiny bit in mid-career, but kids have always been my focus. My advisor, my mentor in medical school, was head of the pediatric emergency room. And I swiftly picked up from him that kids are special. They are innocent, they're honest, they're open, and they do come with some significant baggage in the form of a parent or two. And you have to learn to navigate that as well. But kids, they don't have a second agenda. They just are there, and they don't feel well, or they're hurt, and they're like, can you help? So yeah, it's totally rewarding.
Yeah. And when you have had to perform surgery on kids, have you found that that's harder?
No, there's a certain amount of kind of weird distancing you do as a surgeon from the act of what you're doing, from the performance. The performance of surgery is it's a very strange act. We hurt people to help them. Luckily, we partner with anesthesiologists who are great at minimizing that pain. And but by the same token, we all know that you can't keep someone under anesthesia for weeks until they feel better, and then kind of wake them up and say, well, there's no pain. That's not how life works. So I prepare the kids and the family. I always would talk to the kids, even the little ones, but when they're of a certain age, even a 5 or 6 year old, they start to understand. And I talk to the kids, and what I'm also doing at the same time is I'm speaking to the parents behind me, and I'm letting them know that what they're going to go through is a story. Like we're going to do this surgery, and there's going to be a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I explain to the kids, I'm like, in the stories that you read, the hero gets really tested. At one point, they got to go through some hard stuff, but they fight their way through, they make their way through, and in the end, it all gets better. And by explaining to them before we ever start, there's going to be a beginning, middle, and end, it gives them the confidence to go through something and make it just a little less scary. So is performing surgery on kids harder? No, they tend to heal quicker. They tend to heal better. So that's kind of a real bonus. The results are more predictable than in adults, especially older adults. So that's a bonus. But being open and honest with the kids, that really makes it a navigable journey for the kids and their families.
Yeah. So I understand there's a healthcare advocacy group called the Patient Revolution. What can you tell us about that?
It was a group that I heard about roughly a year ago. And it all kind of came through very circuitous routes. So they started here in the United States. It was started by a internal medicine doc at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. And And it started in, I think, 2016. And they are a global healthcare advocacy group, although they're mostly based in the United States. The way I heard about them is that I work for various NGOs around the world, and so does my wife. And through one of her contacts in Zimbabwe, this woman who's an expat in Zimbabwe, who's been there for 25 years, working in Africa with kids, she sent me a link and said, "Have you heard about this?" And it was an NPR piece on the patient revolution. And so I looked at the piece, and then I contacted them almost immediately, because their messaging is exactly on point with what I was feeling, seeing, hearing. And their message is that we need to slow down in medicine. We need to listen to our patients. They talk about, in the patient revolution, blur, where the patients, for the doctors, the nurses, the therapists, etc., they're moving so quickly through their days and seeing so many people that all you're seeing is basically a blur of individuals, not the individuals themselves. You don't stop to hear their stories, so you don't know how to apply care for them. They also talk about burden, how we've shifted the burden of care from us in healthcare to the patients and their families. Here, you need to go see a specialist in left fifth toe surgery. And what you're going to do is you're going to take your paperwork, and then you're going to go to the x-ray department. You're going to grab your x-rays, and you're going to call your insurance company, and then you're going to make an appointment, and you're going to bring these things to that person. And then you're going to, come back, and you'll show us what they wrote and they did and so forth. You need to kind of pre-authorize this with your insurance company. You need to this, you need to that, and you need to other things. Rather than this huge complex, we are kind of an industrial complex. We take up 18% of our gross domestic product in the US. Rather than us saying to them, let us help you get your papers organized. Let us help you kind of get your information where it needs to be. Let me talk to that physician for you to get them introduced to you. Or maybe, just maybe, you never need to see that doctor, and all I need to do is to get on the phone and talk to them or email them, and they say, well, you don't need to see me, but do X, Y, and Z, and you're good. And save yourself $250 or $500 of copays, et cetera, et cetera. So they talk about blur. The patient revolution talks about blur. They talk about burden. And they talk about changing the fundamentals in medicine, changing our incentives rather than incentivizing throughput of people on a conveyor belt through your medical practice, more about slowing down and giving that person in front of you the care they need. And overall, healthcare can deliver, I believe we can deliver excellent care for a lot less money if we slow down and stop delivering unnecessary care to those who don't need it and start delivering preemptive care to those who do.
Let's take a short pause, and we'll be right back. Would you like to earn more from your audiobook sales? If you're an author with an audiobook, you may have noticed that royalties from Audible especially, and other platforms as well, are frankly kinda pathetically low, disappointingly low, and unfairly low considering what it cost you in effort and resources to create it. How is it the retailers are the ones making all the money off your work and investment? As someone who started in the audiobook industry in 1981, I've found it frustrating that authors keep getting shortchanged. The good news is that Pro Audio Voices just launched Amplify Audiobooks, a direct sale audiobook platform for authors that puts you back in the driver's seat. Earn 65% of the gross sales price that you set. Compare that to the percentage of the percentage that retailers give. Run promotions on schedule whenever you want. Create coupon codes. Build community with your customers, since you'll know who they are and how to contact them. Work with a caring, responsive, supportive team to help you succeed all along the way. Get help with marketing. Get paid weekly. We're helping audiobook authors who are frustrated by painfully low royalties and the barriers that prevent them from managing their own products and customers. Amplify Audiobooks is a direct sale platform that enables authors to earn much higher royalties and have way more control. We're disrupting the audiobook industry by putting authors first. Get started today at proaudiovoices.app or go to proaudiovoices.com and click on the Distribution Amplify link. Join the movement. Let's shift gears just a little bit and talk about your audiobook and the recording process and what that has been like for you. So when we first connected in Portland, you knew right away that you wanted to be the voice for your book. And so you've been in the recording process. Tell us a little bit about, first of all, just kind of generally what that has been like for you and maybe about that decision.
Okay, so a couple of things. I wasn't the one who really, was sure I wanted to be the narrator for this book. I had a number of people, and it was a large number of people who had read the book, who had reached out, contacted me either directly or through my website and said, I can hear your voice in this book. I would love, I'd love the audiobook version. I would love if you narrated it. I'd never done anything like that before. So before I was willing to narrate it, I sent samples to Elias and to you, basically auditioning for my own book.
Right.
Because I wasn't sure. I was like, well, will this voice work? And, I think when you guys got back and said, yeah, this will be, we can definitely make this work. Then I was all in. And then I set up my home studio in my little bunker of a walk-in closet, surrounded by, hanging clothes and in the darkness, and began to start doing some testing and recording with that really nice microphone, that studio mic, which is wonderful. However, it's as if I had some family of teeth and another tongue or two just take up residence in my mouth.
Yeah.
Like there are noises coming out of me that this microphone, which, this microphone, I'm hearing things through this microphone that I never heard through a stethoscope.
Yeah.
I'm hearing gut rumbles, I think, that are from the 6th grade. I don't know what in the world, where these noises are coming from and where the mouth noises and clicks and so forth are coming from. But it's a process, and I'm learning as I go. As I'm about 11 chapters in, I think I'm getting a little bit better at the presentation, but it is a real eye opener. I've had a microphone in front of my face for decades.
Yeah.
But it's different.
It is different.
It's very different.
Yeah. Very different from standing in front of a group of people and being in the booth. Yep. That's great. What did you find the most surprising about the process so far?
The most surprising for me was how many choices there are for any given sentence in the book, for any given emotion in the book. And then to listen to it, because I'll listen back and say, wow, like that wasn't necessarily the best choice there. And I think that was the most surprising thing, was just sort of like, well, gosh, I've stood up and done a number of book readings. And again, by public persona, I'm pretty comfortable just speaking. There's something about it being, there's so much of it, right? You get up and if you do a set, you do a 10-minute, a 20-minute set, it all goes by pretty quickly. This is hours of my voice. And it's like, oh my God, I'm going to be in someone's ear for hours. And, I don't know why they would possibly, put up with this. So I'm trying to make it more as animated as possible, and also, within the realm of believability,
Right.
even though it's fiction.
Right. That's great. Thank you. So I'm curious, do you still perform stand-up during your career as a surgeon?
I did. Yeah. Yeah. Every now and then, either I would get the bug and go down to an open mic night somewhere, or quite a few times I would be asked to do, some benefits and things like that. People knew about my comedy. And it's pretty obvious when I'm walking through the halls or, and I'm talking to people that I'm comfortable. So yeah, I've done here and there. I've done a stand up every now and then. And it is a bit of an addiction. I mean, every now and then I need to satisfy it. But more recently, I've turned toward doing storytelling. I've been going to some the Moth Project, that from New York. So they have a local story slam. So I'll go there and drop a 5-minute story.
Yeah. Yeah. One of these times I'm going to catch you at one of those. So I haven't been out yet. And in terms of your current writing, are you working on a sequel? Will there be a sequel for this one?
Actually, it's this next book it's a prequel.
Okay.
I had a completely different book in mind, and I had kind of arced it out, but enough people asked me that they wanted to hear more about the two main characters in The Wandering Jew, and so I decided I was going to go. Instead of doing a sequel, which eventually I will do, I decided to go back to their origin story, how they met, because they're best friends with a very kind of contentious relationship, and so in the Wandering Jew, they met in Chicago, and I used that hospital where I trained basically as the setting, and that hospital no longer exists. It was a 120-year run for that hospital. It started in 1891, and it was a Jewish hospital that was built to replace the small Jewish hospital that burnt down in the Chicago fire in 1874. And its cornerstone and its mission was the care of all, no matter of race, religion, and ability to pay, all the way back to 1891. And that hospital was true to that mission for 120 years. And that's what killed it, because the south side of Chicago changed over the years, and it became more and more, poor. And the millions of dollars that it took to keep the doors open each year, eventually the donors and their descendants and the descendants and the descendants of the donors eventually said, okay, we can't be responsible for this social burden any longer. And the hospital was carved up into pieces. The health plan was bought up, et cetera, et cetera. And it was left basically to rot on the south side until the city of Chicago raised the entire complex, which was 27 acres of buildings.
Wow.
For the bid for the 2016 Olympics, which they never got. But that hospital died in doing its mission. And so I decided to use that as the setting, because the setting for this prequel will be this 120-year-old hospital dying on the south side of Chicago, but in her dying days gives birth to a last class of caring physicians. And two of them ended up in The Wandering Jew.
Ah, great. And what is so I know that your book is going to be available on Amplify audiobooks, and what's your website so our listeners can go and learn more about you and your work and what's coming up next for you?
Sure. The website is ronturker, turker.com. So not too hard. And yes, I do keep that updated, and more information will come out when the audiobook's ready to drop, and when the next book, which hopefully I'm shooting for beginning of 2025 to get that out on the market. And that's the best way to kind of find out, to contact me, etc.
Okay, great. And anything else that you wanted to share before we wrap up for today?
No, other than this has been it's been a uniquely, fun experience as doing the recording, and I'm anxious to kind of hear how some of the edited material comes out, and I'm hoping that my voice will carry okay for for those who want to read it or listen to it. Yeah, it's a fun process.
Well, thank you so much for being with me. Again, this is Ron Turker, author of The Wandering Jew of St. Salacious. Thanks, Ron.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for joining us for Audiobook Connection, behind the scenes with the creative teams. Please take a moment to subscribe at audiobookconnection.com. The podcast is sponsored by Pro Audio Voices, helping great stories come alive through audiobook production and marketing. Learn more at proaudiovoices.com. Again, thanks for being with us, and please join us next week.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.